You wake up sore and assume something meaningful happened. That assumption feels logical, but biologically, it is weak. Soreness, what we call delayed onset muscle soreness, DOMS, is primarily a pain signal, not a growth signal. It reflects irritation, inflammation, and sensitivity in tissue after unfamiliar stress, not the actual construction of new muscle proteins. Research consistently shows that this signal is unreliable. As one review explains, research hasn't shown a strong correlation between the degree of muscle soreness and muscle hypertrophy. That is the key fracture in the belief system. Now observe the timeline. DOMS typically peaks 24 to 72 hours after training. Muscle protein synthesis, however, can rise within hours and return to baseline within about 80 board and Boehme time hours, depending on training status. These are overlapping but not identical processes. One is sensation, the other is adaptation. Mechanistically, soreness is driven by microtrauma and inflammation that sensitize nociceptors, pain receptors. Cytokines and immune activity increase, which creates stiffness and discomfort. But hypertrophy is driven by mechanical tension, motor unit recruitment, and repeated signaling to build contractile proteins. These are separate pathways. They can coexist, but one does not guarantee the other. Think of soreness like a fire alarm. It tells you something happened. It does not tell you whether the building is being improved or just damaged. This is why beginners feel extreme soreness with minimal muscle gain, while advanced lifters often grow with very little soreness. The signal becomes quieter, but the adaptation becomes more precise. So the first correction is simple. Pain is not proof. It is just feedback and often misleading. The fastest way to feel sore is not to train better. It is to train differently. Change the exercise, adjust the tempo, add a deeper stretch, or introduce a new movement pattern, and soreness appears almost immediately. This is not because the workout was superior. It is because your body was unprepared. This is known as the repeated-bout effect. When you expose a muscle to a new stimulus, especially one with high eccentric loading or long muscle lengths, you create more structural disruption. But with repeated exposure, the same workout produces less soreness and less damage, even if performance improves. As researchers describe, a single bout of eccentric exercise confers a protective effect against muscle damage from subsequent bouts. In practical terms, your body adapts to reduce unnecessary damage, not to reduce growth. Here is the important distinction. Novelty increases damage sensitivity, not necessarily growth stimulus quality. Studies show that markers of muscle damage, like creatine kinase, can spike dramatically after a new exercise, yet drop significantly after just a few sessions, even when strength output is higher. This means your body becomes more efficient at handling the same load. Less soreness, but equal or better performance. Now consider the common mistake. Many lifters constantly rotate exercises to stay sore. They chase new angles, new machines, new variations. This creates a loop. High soreness, low progression. Because each session resets the adaptation curve, the body never fully transitions from damage response to performance adaptation. Mechanically, consistent exercises allow better motor unit coordination, improved force production, and more precise loading of fibers. Random novelty disrupts this learning process. Think of it like learning a language. If you switch languages every day, you will feel mentally exhausted, but you will not become fluent in any of them. So soreness from novelty is not a badge of effectiveness. It is often a sign that your body is still trying to understand the task, not master it. If soreness is noise, then what is the actual signal? The answer is mechanical tension. This is the force experienced by muscle fibers when they contract under load, especially when you recruit high threshold motor units and approach failure. Hypertrophy is fundamentally a problem of recruitment and tension over time, not discomfort. A large body of literature supports this. A widely cited review by Brad Schoenfeld states, mechanical tension is considered the primary driver of muscle hypertrophy. This is not a motivational statement. It is a mechanistic one. When tension is high enough, the muscle activates signaling pathways such as mTOR, which regulate protein synthesis. That is where actual growth begins. Now consider how this plays out in training. You can lift relatively light weights or heavy weights and still build muscle as long as sets are taken close to failure. Research shows that loads as low as bami of 1 rep max can stimulate hypertrophy if effort is high, while traditional ranges of 6 moni then taumilem of 1 rep max are more efficient for most people. The common thread is not pain. It is fiber recruitment under tension. Here is the mistake many make. They equate exhaustion with effectiveness. High rep burnout sets, excessive drop sets, or poorly controlled movements can create intense fatigue and soreness. But if tension is inconsistent, if the muscle is not actually producing high force, then the growth signal is weaker. Mechanistically, high threshold motor units, those connected to the largest, most growth-prone fibers, are recruited either by heavy loads or by approaching failure with lighter loads. If you stop too early, or if technique degrades, those fibers may never be fully stimulated. Think of tension like electricity in a circuit. Growth only happens when the current reaches a certain threshold. Soreness is just heat in the wires. You can have heat without enough current to power anything meaningful. So the question shifts from, did it hurt, to, did I create sufficient tension repeatedly with control and intent? Not in motivation, but in biology. When muscle damage becomes excessive, your body must prioritize repair before adaptation. That shift matters. After a highly damaging session, typically involving excessive eccentric loading, very long muscle lengths, or unfamiliar volume, force production can remain suppressed for several days. Research shows strength can drop by 10 to 50% for up to 72 hours or more, depending on severity. During this window, your ability to generate high mechanical tension in subsequent sessions is reduced. That means the next workout is compromised before it even begins. This is where the concept of stimulus to fatigue ratio becomes important. As coach and researcher Mike Israetel explains, the goal of training is to generate the maximum stimulus with the minimum fatigue cost. Damage-heavy training often violates this principle. It produces a strong sensation, soreness, but also a high recovery cost that limits frequency, volume, and performance quality. Mechanistically, excessive damage increases inflammation, disrupts calcium handling in muscle fibers, and impairs neural drive. These are not conditions that support high-quality contractions. They are conditions that force the body into a protective state. Now consider the long-term consequence. If each session leaves you too sore to train effectively for several days, your weekly training volume drops, your exposure to productive tension decreases, and your progression slows. Growth is not built from single heroic sessions. It is built from repeatable, high-quality sessions. Think of it like construction. If every workday damages a structure so much that the next 2 days are spent fixing it, progress will stall. Efficient building requires controlled stress, not constant destruction. So while some muscle damage is inevitable and not harmful in itself, chasing extreme soreness often shifts the balance away from growth and toward recovery management. The goal is not to avoid effort. It is to avoid wasted damage. There is a subtle but critical skill in training, the ability to apply progressive overload in a controlled, measurable way. Many people replace this skill with something easier to feel: discomfort. The session burns, the muscles ache, the workout feels intense. But intensity of feeling is not the same as progression of stimulus. Progressive overload means doing slightly more over time. More load, more reps, more effective volume, or better execution under the same conditions. Organizations like the American College of Sports Medicine emphasize that resistance training adaptations require a gradual increase in stress placed upon the body. This is not optional. It is the core rule of adaptation. Now look at common gym behavior. Exercises change every week. Rep ranges shift randomly. Loads are not tracked. Technique varies from session to session. In this environment, there is no stable reference point. Without consistency, the body cannot be asked a clear question and therefore cannot give a clear adaptive response. Research-based guidelines typically recommend around 10 to 20 hard sets per muscle group per week for hypertrophy, adjusted for experience level. But those sets only matter if they are comparable across time. If your Muay Thai reps this week is not the same effort or execution as last week, then progression is blurred. Mechanistically, muscle growth responds to repeated exposure to slightly increasing tension demands. If that demand is inconsistent, the signaling pathways, like mTOR activation, are also inconsistent. The body adapts to patterns, not chaos. Here is the uncomfortable truth. It is easier to chase soreness than to track performance. Soreness gives immediate feedback. Progression requires patience, logging, and restraint. Think of it like investing. Random spending can feel active, but only consistent incremental deposits create long-term growth. So the real question is not, did this hurt enough? So it is, did I do more or better than last time under controlled conditions? At some point, the limitation is no longer your training stimulus. It is your ability to recover from it. When recovery is insufficient, soreness tends to increase while actual adaptation decreases. This creates a misleading signal. You feel worse, but you are progressing less. Let us start with sleep. The National Sleep Foundation recommends 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night for adults. Yet studies show that even partial sleep restriction can reduce muscle protein synthesis and impair performance. One controlled study found that sleeping 5 hours per night led to measurable declines in recovery and anabolic signaling. As researchers note, sleep loss is associated with a reduction in muscle protein synthesis and an increase in muscle protein breakdown. This shifts the body toward a net negative state. Now consider nutrition. The International Society of Sports Nutrition recommends protein intakes of approximately 1.4 to 2.0 grams per kilogram of body weight per day for physically active individuals. If intake falls below this range, the body lacks sufficient amino acids to support repair and growth. Glycogen availability also matters. Low carbohydrate intake can reduce training performance and increase perceived fatigue, amplifying soreness signals. Mechanistically, poor recovery affects multiple systems. Glycogen depletion reduces force output. Elevated cortisol from stress or sleep deprivation interferes with anabolic signaling. Connective tissue recovery lags behind muscle recovery, increasing stiffness and discomfort. All of this makes soreness more noticeable while reducing the quality of future training sessions. Now observe the pattern. You train hard, recover poorly, feel extremely sore, and interpret that soreness as proof of effectiveness. In reality, it is often a sign that the system is under-recovered and inefficient. Think of recovery as the environment where growth is constructed. Training provides the blueprint. Without proper conditions, sleep, nutrition, and stress control, the blueprint cannot be executed. So when soreness is high and progress is low, the problem is often not the workout. It is a recovery bottleneck that turns a good stimulus into a poor outcome. At this point, the framework must change. Soreness asks, did something happen? Productive training asks, can I reproduce and improve it? That distinction separates random effort from structured adaptation. In evidence-based programming, progress is tracked through performance indicators: load lifted, repetitions completed, proximity to failure, and execution quality. These are measurable. They can be compared across sessions, and most importantly, they reflect whether the muscle is being exposed to a progressively increasing demand. Research on resistance training consistently shows that hypertrophy occurs when muscles are challenged with sufficient volume and effort, then allowed to recover and repeat that performance. A position stand from the National Strength and Conditioning Association states that progressive overload is necessary for continued adaptations in muscular fitness. In practice, this might look like adding 1 to 2 repetitions or increasing load by 2.5 to 5%, or improving control at the same weight. Now notice what this requires. If a workout leaves you so sore that your next session is weaker, less stable, or inconsistent, then the signal is broken. You cannot compare performance. You cannot progress cleanly. The feedback loop is disrupted. Mechanistically, adaptation depends on repeated activation of the same motor units under slightly greater demand. If each session varies wildly due to soreness, fatigue, or random exercise selection, the nervous system cannot refine recruitment patterns and the muscle cannot be progressively overloaded with precision. Think of it like practicing a skill. If you perform well one day, but are too impaired to practice the next, improvement slows. Consistency is what converts effort into mastery. So the question becomes operational. Can you return to the same movement with similar technique and do slightly more? If yes, you are building muscle. If no, soreness may be interfering more than it is helping. We arrive at the central principle. Your body does not reward how hard a session felt. It responds to how well a stimulus can be applied, recovered from, and repeated over time. Suffering is immediate. Adaptation is cumulative. In modern hypertrophy programming, the goal is to maximize what is often called the stimulus to fatigue ratio. This means selecting exercises, volumes, and effort levels that generate strong mechanical tension while minimizing unnecessary damage and systemic fatigue. As emphasized in hypertrophy research, muscle growth can be achieved across a wide spectrum of loading ranges, provided sets are carried out with a high degree of effort. Schoenfeld et al. Notice what is absent from that statement: soreness. Typical evidence-based guidelines suggest training each muscle group high and bi times per week, accumulating around more than high quality sets weekly, depending on experience. This structure works not because it maximizes discomfort, but because it balances stimulus and recovery, allowing consistent performance progression. Mechanistically, growth requires repeated activation of anabolic signaling pathways, efficient motor unit recruitment, and sufficient recovery resources. Excessive soreness disrupts this cycle. It reduces training frequency, alters movement patterns, and often leads to compensations that shift tension away from the target muscle. Now consider the psychological trap. Many lifters equate discipline with how much they can endure. But in training, discipline is better expressed as precision and restraint, choosing loads you can control, stopping sets when stimulus is maximized, and returning session after session to build upon previous work. Think of this like engineering rather than warfare. You are not trying to destroy the muscle. You are trying to signal it clearly, repeatedly, and efficiently. So the final shift is this. Do not ask, did I suffer enough? Ask, did I create a stimulus I can recover from and improve next time? If this changed how you think about training, subscribe and like the video. The goal is not to chase pain, but to understand the system. So every session contributes to real, measurable progress.